There are stories in the Bible that just seem to constantly tell us again how God views people. Over and over, you find out that He loves people. And you are no more loved if you are wealthy or beautiful or handsome or whatever than anyone else. In fact, one of my premises and I teach this because I believe this strongly, and I've been able to verify it through the Scripture, God never reduces to the elite. The parables that Jesus told, you find those who were elite turning down the invitation. Until finally He says, well, I want you to go out into the highways and hedges and in essence get people who have never even known what a banquet is and bring them in so my house could be full. Well, this morning I'm going to take you to a particular instance that ought to prove this to us, but I think I might tell you a thing or two about it you haven't heard, but it'll be rather humorous in the course of it. In the Old Testament, oh man, Israel, when it was during the time of what we call the Judges, was not an organized place at all. And it was a tough time. It really was. There were moments, and it seemed only to be moments, where they were actually serving the Lord and prospering as a result. But man, with all of the different temptations of idols and the like that are around, they would get backslid. We tend to use that term a lot, you know. One of those times, the Midianites and Amalekites had overrun Israel, and for about 7 years they had made it awfully miserable. And here's the way they would do things. They would watch to see when they brought their crops in, and when they are up on the hilltops on the threshing floors, and you always put a threshing floor on hilltops because you want wind, throwing their grain up in the air so the wind would blow the chaff away and you would have the remaining grain. They would watch that, and when it looked like they were almost through, they'd go take it. So it was a miserable time, and the Israelites had to do whatever they could to hide it. They lived in caves a lot. It was just tough. One particular day, a guy was doing his winnowing, we call it, throwing his grain up, but not on the hilltop, in the wine press. Now, folks, you don't put a wine press where the wind will blow things in it. You don't want that to happen. So this guy, whom you know by the name of Gideon, had it figured out, but he had a real job there. Here's the problem. With no wind, what are you going to do? You have to throw it up in the air and go. So he had a really hard job there. I wonder how he felt at the end of it. Talk about vertigo. Well, then God appears to him and says, Gideon, mighty man of valor. Here he is hidden away, mighty man of valor. You're going to set Israel free. Now, Gideon caught the humor in that. He said, sir, I think you must be lost. This is the wrong address, because I happen to be a member of the lowest family in my tribe, and I am the lowest member of my family. I think you found the wrong place. But I can almost hear God saying, no, you're my man. I'm bottom fishing. You know? And so Gideon believes and follows the instructions of the Lord. And the first thing he was to do was to go and cut down all of their idols that they had, and their Asherah poles, they called them. And so his doing that, and he did it in the night, and built a fire with the wood that he cut down and made a sacrifice on that fire. But you need to know that his doing that as we put it in our vernacular, cooked his goose. He was a doomed man from that point on, because the next day everybody was upset. They were into the idols, and they said, all right, who did this? And they investigated and found out it was Gideon. They were ready to kill him. But Gideon's dad says, well, now, are you going to fight for your Asherah? I mean, can't Asherah handle this all by herself? I mean, you're gods, and you have to fight for them? That doesn't make any sense. And they caught the reasoning of that. There is a Jewish legend that says that when God saw Abraham, or Abram at that point, or well, he wasn't that even, God gave him all his names, that his dad was a maker of idols. And that when God spoke to Abram and called him out, at night Abram went in, now this is a Jewish legend, and crushed all of the idols that he had made except one main big idol. And when his dad came in and realized his son had done that, and his son said, well, Dad, if this big idol has power, don't you think he could have kept me from crushing those other idols? And, well, yeah, that makes sense, doesn't it? I guess he is powerless, so we'll forget about that. I like the legend. It's a fun legend. I doubt that it's true, but anyway, Gideon had cooked his goose. He had done something that, boy, we're going to get you for this. And then really his dad rescued him from that. And now, though, in order to deal with this, God proposes something to Gideon to deal with the bondage of the Midianites and the Amalekites. So he says to Gideon, blow the trumpet. Now, the trumpet would be a shofar, it'd be a ram's horn. They have a way of kind of making them longer when they're curled up. And if you know how to do it, I can't, but my grandkids can do it. They can pick the one up we have and blow it immediately, and I can go. But he blows the shofar, and others join him in doing it, and 32,000 men show up. Now, you have to see this, folks, because there's drama here. You're looking at your untrained army in front of you. Across the valley are the Midianites and the Amalekites, and there are 120,000 of them. Now, what would you be thinking if you were Gideon? You've got 32,000 men. They've got 120,000 men. What are you going to pray for? What are you going to ask God for? God, you're right. I need about another 120,000 men myself, okay? But to hear God say what he did, I love this. He said, well, actually, Gideon, you have too many men. Really? How did you come up with that, God? He says, well, I know these guys. They are going to win, but they'll think they did it. We need to reduce them to the ones who will give me the glory. So Gideon announced to them, if you're scared, go home. 22,000 men went home. Now you're down to 10,000 men, and you're looking across the valley, 120,000 trained soldiers, 10,000 men. This is not good. Now, this can affect your prayer life, you know. Last time I prayed, it cost me 22,000 men. And I can hear God saying, okay, Gideon, I hear your prayer. However, you still have too many men. And I can hear Gideon saying, you know, you're pretty hard to work for sometimes. Anybody ever tell you that? So God says, let's give them a test. Now, when you think about a test, what kind of test would you give? Would you try to ascertain their spirituality? Would you try to find out what they know about battle? Would you try to see whether they look tough enough or what have you? You know, how do you come up with a test? I love this. God is so creative and filled with humor. He said, let's have them take a drink of water in the spring of Harod. Now that word Harod means the spring of trembling, and maybe they named it that after the guys who went home because they were scared, you know. Have them take a drink there. Now, that's still there. It's still there. I mean, you can go and see where those guys did this and how they were able to do this. And so God says, here's the test, Gideon. Here's what I want you to do. Have all of the men take a drink, and the ones who get down like this on all four and drink this way, put them over here. The ones who drink this way, put them over here. Isn't that a strange test? I mean, what does that have to say about their battle ability or anything of that nature? Well, I have a theory about this that I think is provable by the outcome of it all that I don't hear anybody else much talking about. So remember, you heard it here first, okay? When I was a kid, I always heard that these men who got down this way and drank this way were the seasoned warriors who knew how to stay alert while they were drinking so the enemy couldn't catch up on them, you know. Okay, well now that is a cultural view of Scripture. That's a way, because we always want the Super Bowl winners, you know. We want the ones who are the big dudes who really can figure that out. But let me do it this way. Gideon's watching, and he sees them taking a drink like that and like this, and he knows what's going on, because the ones that got down on all fours and went over there ended up being 9,700, and only 300 drank this way, and Gideon knew. I mean, he knew. And God says, okay, I'm going to win with the 300. Now, here's what I want you to think about. These, I do not believe, were the seasoned warriors, and I'll tell you, they weren't that. I believe that the ones who got down like this and drank were the guys who were too fat and too crippled to get down on all four. And God says, okay, I'm going to win with them because they'll give me the glory. You know? Now, why do I think this? Well, the next thing that happened is they're planning what to do with these 300, and God had given them the instructions. They armed these, if they were elite warriors, the arms they gave them would make no sense at all. They armed these 300 guys, and then, of course, the other 9,700 they sent home. So he's down. Can you imagine looking at this army? Oh, man, how heavy are you anyway? You can't run. Oh, you're crippled. You can't fight. God, what are you up to? So here was the scene. They armed those guys with a torch inside a jug. And on the other hand, if they were the elite warriors, they would have had a sword, right? No, they weren't the elite warriors. On the other hand, they had a trumpet, a shofar. Now, I've often thought, you see, I have grandkids, and what if I had been one of those guys, and my grandkids later on says, Grandpa, tell me how you won the war again. And all you can say is, well, I broke a jug and blew a horn. Now, in your mind, see, because I know how I heard all about this in my young days, which were a long time ago, but in your mind, you see them rushing down on the Midianite army. No, that's not what happened. I mean, you can't expect us fat boys to run or crippled guys to run. All they did, this was their only instruction. Blow the horn, shout, the arm of Gideon, and break the jug where the light shines and stand there. Boom. Oh, I wish somebody would put together, a biblical movie with this theory of mine. But it's the only thing that fits it. If they were elite warriors, you would never have done this with them. But you see, as I mentioned earlier, God never reduces to the elite. Because if he does, then they will think they did it. But he works with people like us. Isn't that great? Because we know that if a victory is won, it wasn't us, it was him. I don't know about you, but I approach life feeling very vulnerable and weak. And I depend on the Lord, and he authorizes me to do that. To pray, thy will be done, because my will isn't getting it. But the nice thing about it is he tells us to pray, thy will be done as it is in heaven. Well, the outcome of this was really fascinating. God has ways of setting the stage, and in that Midianite army, and of course they didn't expect anything to come out of the Israelites. They had their own spies, and they knew that if ever there was a vulnerable bunch of people, it was them. But somebody had a dream. Oh, I dreamed that there was a barley cake that came rolling down the hill and destroyed our tents. And another guy interprets it, oh, well, that must have been Gideon. Now, here's the thing about a barley cake. Wheat was the prized possession and crop back then. Barley was half the price of wheat. A barley loaf meant it was something, they threw something worthless at us. And isn't that interesting? That just goes to show how God tends to put things together. And so by the time the moment comes, they're already a little terrified, because of this dream. It got around, and they are, I wonder what's going to happen. And sure enough, when 300 men in 3 groups of 100 shout the army of Gideon, or about Gideon, and blow the trumpet, and suddenly they see these lights, they start killing themselves. They start fighting against each other, and they begin to run, and the people who had gone home now start chasing them. At least they can do that. You can hit people from behind a whole lot easier anyway. And heading them off at the pass. And then eventually the guys that were Gideon's 300 begin to chase them too. But there is a rather cryptic little moment that I see it the way I've been telling you. The only thing it says about them is that when they got to the Jordan River, they were exhausted. I thought, that doesn't sound like seasoned warriors at all, But it causes me to say, God, if I can just learn to give you the glory, I can win battles that I would never win any other way. If I understand that in my flesh there's not going to be much that can be accomplished, and in my selfishness, self-centeredness, I'm not going to be able to bless other people very well or fulfill your will. But sometimes maybe, Lord, even in what might seem to others to be irrational, especially if it's belief in you, real battles can be won. And out of the 120,000 members of the Midianite Amalekite army, when it was over, there were only 15,000 of those guys left. And I'm thinking, way to go, 300. Now, the thing is, you're not going to put one of those guys up on a statue. You look at him. I live in California, and there at the Coliseum, where University of Southern California football games are played, there are statues of kind of the perfect humans, and the kind of people that you would see out here in Olympics and so forth. And I want you to take note, if you're ever there, it does not look like me. And I realized they're never going to put up a statue, you know. Here he is in his might. Here he is in his strength. Yeah, you know. Well, maybe if you put a horn in my hand and a jug with a lantern in the side of it, that might be so. But you see, these are not the things that we, as human beings, honor, but God does. He can take the weakest of us, the least, whatever, I mean, the least expected person. And the only thing I see out of this that really in a way amazes me is that these 300 were not part of the group that went away scared. And that's something. I think if I were one of those guys, I would have said, oh, I'll die. I mean, look at me. I can't get away. I can't. We're going to have to run. They'll catch me. But those guys stayed. They were part of the 10,000. And another thing I find fascinating too is that when that final cut was made and 9,700 remaining ones were sent home, there is no evidence that any one of those 300 said, Mr. Gideon, can I talk to you? Could I resign? Would you send me home too? Let's call one of those other guys back and whatever, you know. They stayed. It's like they had nothing to lose. You know, here I am. I'm not the big one. I'm not the great one. But if I can be used, I'll stay. I'm not going to be able to fight the way people normally fight. But if God can use me, I'm here. I like that about these guys. I like that about the way God operates. And if you feel like you are nothing, that's not true. That is not true at all. Let me kind of give you a clue. Do you ever kind of, when you have a real need, and I don't know if you have what we sometimes call a prayer partner or people that you depend on, who do you tend to go to that you want to have pray for you, you know? Well, let me give you how I like to deal with this. I like to have children pray for me. Why? They will only believe, you know? As a pastor, when I really began traveling around the world, you know, I was a tendency to have the elders gather around me and pray for me before I left, and I quit doing that. I knew those guys, you know. They were great, actually, but you know what I started doing? On a Sunday before I would begin a journey overseas, I would have the children of the church gather around me and put their hands on me and pray for my trip. Because they only believe. So if you really want to see miracles, have a child pray for you. Some of you will see a little sticker back there with a caricature of me on it and a little sign that says, if you take one of these, let it remind you to pray for me. Now, the reason I put it back there, I did a junior high retreat several years ago. There were several hundred junior hires there, and we were way out in the desert. I didn't even know this oasis existed. But there I noticed that they had these, and the director of it all, when it was over, said, I've got a box of these left over, you know, because they have to order them by the thousands, I guess. He said, would you like to have them? I said, well, I don't know. What are you going to do with them? Well, I'll just throw them away. I said, well, don't throw them away. I'll take them. Maybe I can figure out something to do with it. And so I was up in Montana, Billings, Montana, And I decided I want to try something. So I put that little sign out. Said, if you take one of these, let it remind you to pray for me. And I put those caricatures out. And I stood back and just watched. And you know who took them? Children. And I thought, I just hired a whole bunch of prayer warriors, you know. And I say, you don't have to remember my name. Just look at that and think, God help that fella. But I know this, that God really is partial to children, and He's partial to the weak. And when the story is told by Jesus for the invitation to be sent out to a wonderful banquet, and this was so prophetic, the first invitations went to the elite, the people who had something, the people who were something. They were all busy. It's still that way. And finally, He says, well, I want you to go out into the highways, the hedges. That means way out in the country. Really, in essence, where they don't even know there is such a thing as a banquet. Because I want my house to be full. I like that. You're a really great God. You know that? And we love you and we thank you for that. And thank you for calling and using us. Amen.